Det blir väldigt konkret. Ja, just här, men jag är väldigt kan man gå bort här? Man får göra sina var nära.
Hej! Hallå! Välkomna hit! Välkomna till det här som är festivalpremiären av Studio Draken. Jag heter Tara Moshisi. Jag är så sjukt glad över att vara här. Jag har verkligen peppat inför det här i månader. Och jag hoppas att ni har haft en skön helg allihopa, att ni har laddat för en fullspäckad festivalvecka som väntar nu. Och som ni säkert vet så slog vi upp portarna till Göteborgs filmfestival i fredags. Och det har ju hunnit hända grejer sedan dess, som man säger så. Vi har haft fina besök, bland andra av Rafe Fiennes som var här och gästade i Göteborg. Och dessutom så har ju också Monty Python-stjärnan Terry Gilliam varit här. Och det första som hände när jag kom till filmfestivalens kontor idag, det var att de sa till mig att vet du, Terry Gilliams i helgen så slog han festivalens programchef Jonas Holmberg i pingis. Det var liksom det största som hade hänt under helgen. Det var planerat att Sasha Shevchenko skulle komma hit. Hon ingår ju i den ukrainska barbröstade feministgruppen Femen. Tyvärr så är hon inte här ikväll. Det är nämligen så att Sasha söker politisk asyl. Hon är i Paris och kämpar för det just nu. Hon har inget pass och kan tyvärr alltså inte lämna Frankrike. Men vi får hålla tummarna för henne. Och jag vill verkligen passa på att rekommendera alla att se dokumentären om Femen. Den heter Ukraine is not a brothel. Den är så otroligt välgjord och spännande. Och den känns otroligt angelägen just nu tycker jag också. Lyckligtvis så har vi ett helt gäng skitbra gäster som kommer komma hit ikväll. Alldeles strax så ska ni få träffa två väldigt lovande regissörer. De heter Ninja Thyberg och Lovisa Sirén. Och vi ska snacka... en applåd för dem! Ja. Bra. Vi kommer snacka kortfilm. Jag ska också prata med den otroligt coola DJ:n Elena Wolay som ska spela här ikväll. Och sen så är jag ska säga att jag i första hand är rätt så nervös. Men framför allt så är jag stolt, på gränsen till mallig, över att snart besökas av en av litteraturens största stjärnor just nu, författaren CHIMAMANDA NGOZI ADICHIE. Kan vi inte hon också få en applåd? Jo. Hennes roman En halvgul sol har ju filmatiserats och visas just nu här på Göteborgs filmfestival. Och jag och hon, vi kommer prata både om livets svärta och sötma. Men först ska det alltså handla om kortfilm, så välkomna upp på scenen Ninja och Lovisa. Man känner sig lite som Oprah när man sitter så här. Welcome! Varsågoda. Ta lite vatten om ni behöver och varsin mick. Det blir superbra. Hörrni, har ni haft en bra helg här i Göteborg?
Ja, är den på? Nej.
Ska vi se till så att den kommer på?
Hallå.
Ska kolla. Så den är på. Nu ska vi se. Vår kära vän Isak på tekniken kanske kan lösa det. Hallå. Vi kan göra så. Vi lånar Lovisas mick först. Och så vi hoppas att vi får liv i den.
Okej, bra helg.
Mm. En kortfilmstävling som ni båda deltog i. Jag tänkte vi ska börja med dig, Ninja. Din film Hot Chicks, en kortfilm, handlar ju om 5 otroligt peppade och snygga tjejer som är dansare och de ska medverka i en musikvideo. Och vi får träffa dem när de står och gör sig i ordning i logen och de står och värmer igång sig själva och sminkar sig och fixar sig. Varför vill du göra den här filmen?
De är inte dansare, de är modeller, men det är typ en grej i början att de inte är dansare men ändå dansar och de sminkar. Varför vill jag göra det? Jo, men jag var väldigt intresserad av det. Jag började någon slags utforskande av det där. Men den snygga tjejen som en kulturell arketyp, som jag kallar det. Och Lisa blir satt av henne och hon funkar. Hon säljer alla typer av produkter, det spelar ingen roll. Liksom det mest, vad som helst för att sälja en snygg tjej. Och hon funkar till alla målgrupper, unga, gamla, män, kvinnor. Och vi får inte nog av henne. Det är liksom något här, man tycker att vi borde ha sett tillräckligt många snygga tjejer. Liksom det här, den snygga tjejen, ung, smal, vältränad, västerländsk för det mesta. Det är en viss liksom, typ. Men att vi borde ha sett oss mätta på henne vid det här laget, men det är som att det bara blir mer om, vi får inte nog. Så undrar jag så här, vad är det hon står för? Vad symboliserar hon? Så det var liksom där jag började.
Har du tröttnat på henne, den snygga tjejen?
Nej, verkligen inte. Nej.
Jag tänkte vi ska kolla på ett klipp så att vi får lite feeling. Kan vi läsa det? Det kommer komma här bakom oss alldeles strax. Ur Hot Chicks.
Du menar att som på ett seriöst sätt, att jag sa det och liksom menade det?
Eller bara tänkte det?
Min utgångspunkt med filmen är ju liksom, den handlar väldigt mycket om den manliga blicken och att vi har ett visst sätt att betrakta tjejer på, och att de mediala bilderna liksom, de lever med oss även i mötet med verkliga människor. Och det tror jag tror att jag kan avfärda en snygg tjej. Alltså det som bimbon rymmer, liksom, den bilden av kvinnan på något sätt som idén om bimbon rymmer, den bär jag väl med mig hela tiden, förmodligen delvis liksom. Och jobbar med eller försöker uppmärksamma så, men ja.
Det kommer in ytterligare en person här. Dels är den här gruppen av modellerna som ska vara med i videon, men dels också en fotograf som kommer in för att hon ska fixa lite med datorn. Vad fyller hon för funktion sådär, hon som kommer utifrån?
Hon är väl på något sätt, hon blir ju den som, det blir ett kvinnorum där det finns någon slags, alla går in i den här liksom psykosen av liksom skönhet är det som eftersträvas på något sätt, eller de skapar den vackra tjejen, de gör sig själva till vackra tjejen, och så kommer det in någon annan som står för någonting helt annat. Typ, det är ju liksom en kliché, men hon kommer in där och har kort hår och arbetskläder och jobbar med teknik, och då blir det liksom sätter igång, eller på något sätt, det är lite som att hack i skivan på något sätt. De kan inte fortsätta i samma spår, utan det leder till någon form av reflektion. Hennes blick på dem, eller självmedvetenhet hos dem, att de känner sig liksom ifrågasatta i det de gör, bara av hennes närvaro i rummet.
Hon säger inte så mycket, men ändå så hamnar de i någon slags försvarsposition. Och de kommer in på en diskussion som jag känner igen från omklädningsrum på gymnasiet kanske, som handlar väldigt mycket om den här hora-madonna-problematiken, och de börjar peka ut så här, vem i sällskapet är madonnan och vem är horan, och så diskuterar de kring det. Vad var din tanke med det? Varför vill du inkludera den diskussionen?
Ja, men det är ju någonting också där med liksom den här balans, att som kvinna då, att balansera hela tiden av att liksom leva upp till kravet på skönhet, men inte göra det för mycket, för man vill inte vara en slampa, man vill inte se billig ut, man ska vara snygg, men man ska inte sminka sig för mycket. Det är lite pinsamt att sitta och sminka sig offentligt, och man ska liksom inte vara för ytlig. Så att det är den där med liksom att vara den goda eller den dåliga kvinnan som, ja, det är en dubbel bestraffning i det där, att det är väldigt svårt att ligga rätt i det. Det är någonting som hotar från båda håll på något sätt. Så att ja, det var väl det jag ville ta upp.
Vad har du fått för respons då?
Bra respons än så länge. Den hade ju premiär i lördag, så att det är ju liksom bara den här helgen som jag får möta för första gången en publik till min film. Liksom, och det är ju jättespännande. Man har jobbat med någonting i nästan ett år och inte alls vet så här, vad kommer folk tycka. Men jo, det är väldigt kul. Jag har fått bra respons. Mm.
Jag tänkte du får lov att lämna över micken till din kompis Lovisa här. Lovisa, till dig vill jag säga grattis. Du vann ju Startsladden igår. Tack. Coolt. Absolut. Nu kommer den klassiska sportfrågan. Hur känns det?
Jättebra.
Hur firade du? Nu var det några som skrattade.
Drack massa öl och vin och dansade och hade efterfest.
Så som man bör fira helt enkelt. Ja. Din kortfilm heter Pussy Have the Power och handlar om ett gäng tjejer som ska spela in en låt. Jag tänkte vi ska ta och kika lite på hur det ser ut. Vad är det som har hänt här egentligen?
I filmen alltså?
Ja, precis.
Ja.
Ja.
Nej, men de här tjejerna håller på att spela in låten Pussy Have the Power. Och ja, håller på där och så dyker upp en kille som jobbar i studion bredvid. Och lägger sig i direkt, gillar låten och vill vara med och mixa den.
Och då uppstår den här konflikten. Jag tänkte på när jag såg den här filmen så är det ju dialogen dem emellan som är så otroligt central hela tiden. Vad var din tanke med det? Vad vill du fånga i de här snacken tjejerna sinsemellan?
Ja, alltså den här filmen är ju väldigt inspirerad av en händelse som jag var med om. Vi gjorde den här låten, jag och mina kompisar, Pussy Have the Power alltså. Och så var det en kille som gillade den och ville vara med. Och vi hade massa diskussioner kring det här. Och då ville jag väl bara fånga det som vi hade på något sätt.
Vad hände då? Fick han vara med?
Ja, mer eller mindre till slut, ja.
Men vad var det som gjorde att du var sugen på att göra film av den här händelsen?
Nej, men jag tyckte det var så intressant. Liksom. Det bara så här, kändes rätt och det roligaste som jag skulle kunna göra just då. Och mest intressanta.
Och de kompisarna som du spelade in den här låten med, har de fått se filmen?
Ja.
Vad tyckte de?
De gillar den. Men de tycker väl att de är ju med, 2 av dem är ju skådespelare och spelar i filmen. Så att de tycker, de älskar den. Men det är väl lite konstigt att se sig själv så här på film.
Ja, men kunde de känna igen sådär, det där måste vara jag eller det där måste vara du?
Ja, de har pratat lite sinsemellan om, ja men du spelar ju mig. Nej, men jag spelar ju dig. Alltså, de vet inte riktigt vilka, alltså de är inte exakt som sig själva utan de spelar varandra lite grann.
Okej. Jag tänker på just i era kortfilmer, det är ju ganska lite tid som ni har att spela på när ni gör de här filmerna. Och publiken ska ju ändå få en uppfattning om vilka de här karaktärerna är och vad som skiljer dem åt, vad som är specifikt för dem. Hur gör ni för att etablera de här karaktärerna och deras drag? Nu får ni samsas lite om micken, tror jag. Om den inte funkar.
Ja, nej men det där är ju lite det som jag tycker med min film var det svåra, att inte ha en huvudkaraktär när det är så kort tid. För det är ju liksom det lättaste sättet att få publiken hooked liksom. Det är det absolut så här, man identifierar sig med huvudkaraktären och så är man känslomässigt involverad. Och att inte ha en huvudkaraktär utan ha 5 och att det inte händer någonting alltså det är lite kanske lite hårt att säga det men mot mig själv, men det är lite som att det inte händer någonting i filmen. Det sitter 5 personer i ett rum och pratar, that's it. Så det försökte jag ju ändå att man skulle knyta an till dem och presentera dem. Det får ju andra säga om jag lyckades eller inte, men det, ja.
De skiljer ju sig åt väldigt mycket också, tjejerna i din film.
Men när jag skrev manuset och när jag gjorde karaktärsbeskrivningar, då hade vi otroligt mycket på varje person. Så här. Den har den här bakgrunden och den, alltså verkligen en sån heltäckande karaktärsbeskrivning. Sen är det väldigt lite av det som väl kommer med i filmen. Liksom.
Varför vill du jobba så då? För det är så viktigt att ha en tydlig berättelse kring varje karaktär om det ändå inte sen kommer med i filmen.
Det handlar ju i arbetet med skådespelaren eller i regin, och för att överhuvudtaget ska kunna uppstå någon trovärdig dynamik, tror jag, så måste alla ändå veta vad det är de gör och vilka de är. Så att man har massa och så skalar man av och så förhoppningsvis så har det ändå sipprat igenom tillräckligt mycket eller någonting av allt det där förarbetet liksom märks i spelet eller så.
Och Lovisa, dina karaktärer har ju till viss del funnits i verkligheten. Hur jobbade du med att få fram deras drag tydligt?
Jag utgick ju lite från dem själva liksom. Och så bytte jag plats lite på dem för att det kändes bäst att göra så att de inte helt liksom ska vara sig själva. Men det var väl liksom, jag tror det kom fram lite i manuset bara hur de skulle vara. Och sen så fick de ju vara som de, alltså jag utgick väldigt mycket från skådespelarna liksom, att de kommer göra det som alltså de fick tolka det själva och så blev det bra direkt liksom när jag hörde dem läsa igenom på repet och så
så
kändes det bara som att de hade hittat sin tolkning direkt.
Hörrni, det här med kortfilm, det känns som att det bara blir större och större. Förutom att vi har sett en hel del bra filmer här på festivalen så är det många kanaler som har öppnats för att man ska kunna lägga upp egna filmer på nätet och sådär. Vad tycker ni att kortfilmen har för status idag?
Jag tycker att det är lite svårt att svara på sådana här frågor, eller just idag, för jag vet ju inte hur det har varit innan och därför har jag inte liksom, jag kan inte se över tid någon så här, för 10 år sedan såg det ut på det här sättet, för då höll inte jag på med kortfilm. Men jag upplever väl kanske att kortfilmen ändå har tyvärr ganska låg status fortfarande. Att det inte riktigt räknas att göra kortfilm på samma sätt som långfilm, eller att det är en väldigt stor skillnad. Och det är ju väldigt tråkigt, men ja, det är klart att YouTube liksom spelar otroligt stor roll och att det måste bli en förändring. Allting pekar väl på att folk konsumerar film i kortare format.
Jo, men jag tycker att det borde finnas en tv-kanal som visar kortfilm.
Bra affärsidé.
Ja, men det hade ju varit perfekt. Liksom. Man sätter på tvn och så kanske man bara vill kolla i 10 minuter. Liksom. Att det finns där så tillgängligt. Liksom. Det känns inte som att det är så många som inte jobbar med film som kollar på kortfilm. Och det är väl svårt att hitta. Liksom.
Så om det är någon tv-mecenat här ute som vill ha en ny idé så bjuder Lovisa på den. Hörrni, era filmer och de andra filmerna från Startsladden visas på Hagabion nu till helgen. Jag tycker verkligen ni ska kolla på dem. Lovisa och Ninja, tack så hemskt mycket för att ni kom hit.
Tack. Tack.
Varsågoda. Hörrni, det är dags att gå över till nästa intervju här. Jag har funderat på lite på vad som händer med kärlek, med vänskapsband och med framtidsplaner när ett krig plötsligt kommer i vägen. Och med den här romanen, En halvgul sol, så skildrar hon livet för 2 systrar och deras familjer under Biafra-kriget i Nigeria under slutet av 60-talet. Och nu så har den här mångfaldigt prisbelönade och hyllade romanen blivit till film och den visas här under Göteborgs filmfestival. Welcome up on stage, CHIMAMANDA NGOZI ADICHIE. Hello. Welcome. Nice to meet you. How are you today?
I'm cold, but I'm well.
What have you done today?
Lots of interviews. Yes.
And I was thinking, you were born in Nigeria.
Yes.
And at the time you're living in the US and in Nigeria as well.
Yeah, more and more in Nigeria now.
Where do you do your best writing?
In the bathroom.
In the bathroom? Please tell us about that.
No, I write where it doesn't really matter where I am, and I think it also depends on what I'm writing. So there are times when I was writing this book, I wrote it in Nigeria, in the US, in London. There were times when I needed to go back to my hometown, my ancestral hometown. There are times when I just needed to be in a particular place so I could smell the soil, and I just needed to be there. And other times where it didn't matter, as long as I had a good table and a good chair and light. So it doesn't. I just need quiet and silence.
Yeah, because how do you find the focus to concentrate on your writing?
I don't really have much of a life, so it's actually not very difficult. This is true.
So what's the first thing you do when you come to Nigeria?
So I go back tomorrow. What will I do? I don't know. I'll just sort of go home and eat, I guess. It's not, my life really isn't very interesting. So I spend a lot of time reading. That's what makes me happy.
What do you read?
I read everything. I read everything from fashion magazines to strange poetry. I read everything.
What was it that made you interested in literature at the first?
I don't remember when I wasn't interested. Right, so I have friends who have stories of when they knew they wanted to be writers. I don't have a story like that because when I was 4, I was writing little stories, and it had never occurred to me that writing was something you had to decide to become, because I've just always been interested in writing and also in reading. So I was the child who read, when I was 10, I was reading books I had no business reading, sort of really adult books. So I don't know, I can't explain that interest, but I know that words are the most important things to me, that I'm happiest when my writing is going well.
So besides the reading and the writing, can you describe how your childhood was?
My childhood was, I grew up in a university town in Nigeria, in Nsukka, which is a town that I write about a lot because it's the hometown of my heart in many ways. In Nigeria, when we say hometown, often we mean our ancestral hometowns. So I grew up in Nsukka, this university town. It was a very small, closed community, and it was gated, so everything was inside the campus. I went to the primary school inside the campus. There was a library, there was a church. It was just really a sort of a small, closed, and very happy place. I had a very happy childhood. My family is very close-knit. We're sort of really normal, and we laugh, that sort of thing. And then I would spend some time in my ancestral hometown. So we spent holidays in my ancestral hometown, which is where my grandmother lived, and which was more the village, right? So it was, and I also loved going because it was where I felt this sense of connection to my history, and even as a child, I would romanticize things and think, if we went to the stream, for example, I would think my great-grandfather fished in the stream, and
You get nostalgic.
Yes.
Yeah. And these towns, so what are they like today?
It's still, I just spent Christmas in my ancestral hometown. It's changing in the way that what people happily call development, which I suppose it is. So now in front of my father's house in my hometown, it's a big tarred road, so cars zip past, which wasn't the case when I was a child. And more the mud huts are disappearing. And people no longer go to the stream because now they have boreholes and running water, that sort of thing. And it's progress, but I've also find myself nostalgic for what it was like when I was a child.
And how has that affected everyday life in this town?
I guess people want that. People are very happy about that because, it makes sense. Life is relatively easier, right? But I suppose what it means as well is that, and I don't know if this is my romanticizing, although maybe not, because I think there's a sense of community that's being eroded. People no longer, when I was growing up, for example, when I was a child and we would go to my ancestral hometown, an adult who wasn't related to you could set you straight if you did something bad on the street, right? Because everybody felt connected. So they would say, I'm going to spank you if you do that again. And often it was somebody who was just from the town. But it was a sense of community, so a sense of the children were raised by everyone. That's not there anymore. There's a lot more of, I think, individualism has become more the norm, and that people now define family as nuclear much more than before. When I was growing up, it still is, but not as much. It was really about an extended family. So Christmas meant cousins and aunts and all sorts of people, and now it's not quite as colorful.
But how do you define your family?
Actually, my definition is broad. Nuclear, but I have cousins I'm very close to and feel. So my definition, and sometimes I think of my friends as family as well.
Sometimes I think of my neighbors as family because I see them all the time. It's been 11 years since you released your first book, Purple Hibiscus. Do you feel that your writing has changed people's perception of Nigeria in any way?
I don't know. That's not why I write, but if it does, I wouldn't be unhappy. I don't set out my political self is very different from my literary self, if that makes sense. So politically, I'm very aware about how I come from a place that's just grossly misunderstood and misinterpreted. And but when I'm telling my stories, I'm not thinking about changing anybody's mind. I'm just thinking about telling my story, telling it as truthfully as I can. And so if it ends up changing perceptions, that makes me happy. But it's not the intent, because I think it's just as dangerous to start off writing thinking about, I shall now change your perception of Nigeria, because I think there's just something about it that would be false. Because then you would hold back on certain things, because then you're thinking, if I put that, they're going to think that we're right. So
it's still fiction.
Yeah, but yeah, I think, but when you read about a place that you don't know well, it's very easy to generalize from the specific, which I suppose people will do. But I mean, I had people who said to me, "Oh, it's terrible that Nigerian men are so abusive to their children."
And what do you say to that?
It was one character who was abusive to his child in the book, but somehow this person doesn't know anything about Nigeria, so it means all Nigerian fathers are abusive. And actually, when the book came out in Nigeria, I felt very sorry for my father, because people in Nigeria thought it was about him. So I would go to events, and once my father was there, and I noticed that people were giving him very dirty looks because they thought that...
Oh, no.
And so at some point I had to say to them, well, my father is nothing like the father character. My father is sort of very quiet and very calm, and I'm sure that people were looking at him thinking, this is the man who committed all of these horrors. But it's that, I suppose it's just to say that it's not surprising when people read reality into novels.
It's because you always want to do that. You want to find where it all comes from.
Yeah.
Speaking of your father, I've read that he helped you a lot when you wrote this book, Half a Jell's Son.
Yeah.
How did you work together?
He talked a lot about my father, the character of the university professor, not in his personality, but in his kind of his educational journey, is really my father's. So I based a number of things that happened to him on my father's experiences. So my father fled from the university town, and they had an hour to leave because there was bombing, and they ended up losing everything they owned, and all of that. So my father was very helpful because he opened up his memories for me. And it was something he hadn't talked about until I started to ask him questions, because the war just wasn't something people talked about. But not that it's surprising. I think that when you experience something traumatic, it's not that surprising that you keep silent about it. So I couldn't have written this book without my father, because he turned the facts into truths. He made all the things I had read in books human. So I knew the things that had happened, but my father's stories let me know how they had felt.
But weren't you ever afraid that it would be too emotional or too painful for him, talking about these terrible things?
Yes, but it's also, I think it was difficult, but I don't think that we should avoid, I thought it was necessary. I thought it was important that I know what happened to my father, that I wanted to know how my grandfathers had died. I knew my grandfathers had died in refugee camps, but I wanted to know how. And I know it was difficult for my father to talk about, but I thought it was important. And he was very generous, because he could easily have said no, right? But he didn't. And but even listening to the stories was difficult for me. But I just felt haunted and compelled, and I had to write the book. It was like being possessed of something. So being possessed of a spirit that refused to leave me until I wrote the book.
And what was the difficult part of it?
Everything was difficult. Nothing was easy.
And you were just 25 at the time.
I was?
Kind of. I don't know.
20... So I finished it I had to have been older. I was born in 1977, Because sometimes I forget how old I am.
Me too.
Does it happen to anybody else? I really forget.
Probably, yes.
So sometimes when I'm asked how old I am, I have to do the math. 77, 70.
Well, I can help you, I think, because you were born 7 years after the war ended.
Yes.
The Biafra war in
yes.
Nigeria.
Yes.
So, could you see like how people and how everything had been affected by the war? Could you still see that?
Not in a direct way. So by the time I was old enough to notice, houses had been rebuilt. So not directly, but in terms of memories and in terms of the things that were left unsaid and unspoken, yes. Even as a child, I knew that there were just parts of our history that were silent. So my parents would often refer to what they had lost during the war, but never talk in detail about the war itself. So as a child, I knew, my grandfathers had died, my father had lost. So many of my father's books, much like Odenibo in the novel, when I was growing up, many of my father's books were books that had been sent to him by friends because he lost all his books. And I would open these books, and sometimes it was somebody else's name on the book. And I knew that had something to do with the war, but I didn't really know. So in that way, those were the things that I observed when I was old enough to notice, but not the more obvious things, not like buildings that were destroyed.
Because me and my family, we experienced the Iran and Iraq war in the 80s in Tehran. And I can feel that my relatives, they don't really want to talk about the war. They want to spare me from the details in order to protect me. Can you recognize any of that?
Yeah. But I think the question is, do you want to be protected from the memories?
No, not now, but perhaps when I was younger, when I was a teenager.
Oh, right. No, I think that I think it's really quite normal. I think this is what, when you think about the Jewish Holocaust, for example, how it took a new generation of people to really start to tell the stories because the people who'd experienced it just couldn't, I think. And so it's understandable, absolutely. But I think when you're a child, you still know that something is going on. You know that your family is carrying. You know that there's a shadow. You know that you just know. You sense it. Right?
Your novel just recently became a film, and you can see it here now on the Gothenburg Film Festival. And it's about two sisters, Olana and Kainene, and their families, and they all struggled in the war. Why did you specifically choose to write about two sisters?
I don't know. It's not because I have a sister. I just wanted to write about it. But I should say that for me, the soul of this novel is not so much the sisters as it is Ugu, who is the houseboy. But the film is really about the sisters. But I think the novel is really about Ugu. But
can you tell us about him for those who haven't read the book?
He grows up in a poor rural village. He comes to work for the professor in the university town as domestic help. And he's very bright, he's very inquisitive, he's very intellectually curious. And this professor decides to help him get educated. So Ugu then grows, comes into his own. He's still domestic help, but he's reading books, he's asking questions. And in the end, he really is the storyteller. He's the person who tells the story of what happens to them. And in some ways, I guess it was my way of... I think this book is also about who gets to tell a story, whose story it is.
And why was it important to tell his story?
Because, well, he starts off as somebody on the margins. So he's not educated, he's poor, so he's maybe the person we least expect to be the storyteller. And I think that perspective is important. But also being on the margins means that Ugu was able to observe everybody else. And but also because he's involved, he's immersed in the experience, and he's an outsider but not an outsider, if that makes sense. And in a larger way, I think it was my way of saying, African stories should be told by Africans, because so many African stories are told by outsiders. And in the novel, there's an Englishman who wants to to tell the story, and he's very well-meaning, but in the end, it's not his story to tell.
And when I was reading the book, I was thinking that you can see it as if the war is a character by itself. Because in the beginning, it's just there in the background, and it's more and more coming to affect people's life. And at the end, it's almost like a person itself.
Yeah, I suppose that, yeah, we could say that.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
No.
No. Okay. Let's go on to my favorite subject.
Okay.
Feminism. What made you a feminist?
I don't know. I don't think my feminism is... I think I was born one. I mean, it's not...
Really?
Yeah, because it's not ideological. I didn't read a book and suddenly think I shall now take on the mantle of feminism. I didn't really have an aha moment when I realized... I don't remember when I didn't think that men and women were equal. I've always thought that. I've always... It might be that growing up, I'm the fifth of 6 children, and so I have an older brother and a younger brother, and the 3 of us we grew up together really and did everything together. And my mother, and I don't know if this, my mother is kind of feminist, kind of not.
In what way?
So my mother is brilliant, and she retired a few years ago, but she became the first woman to be registrar of the university. So the registrar in Nigeria is the administrative head of the university, so sort of in charge of everything that isn't academics. And so she was a role model. She made history, that sort of thing, and she holds her own. But then she has some interesting cultural ideas that I disagree very fiercely with.
And what could that be?
She thinks that a woman who is successful and established must still somehow defer to her husband because her husband is still the head of the family. And this is something I completely and deeply disagree with, because I think the husband and wife are partners. My mother, it's that kind of thing where they say, well, he's the head, but it's a companionship where he's the head. And I'm thinking, if you just start using that language, it's problematic. Right? So we disagree on that sort of thing. But still, when I was growing up, many of my friends were raised to be very aware of gender assumptions and roles. My mother didn't do that. My mother didn't say, you're the girl, go to the kitchen. My mother said, 3 of you, go to the kitchen. So everybody did the same thing. The chores were the same. We didn't have things that we had to do based on gender. If anything, it was based on ability. My mother would say to me, you're good at this, so go do that. You're good at that. My brother, go do that. Right? And
did your brothers agree with that? Or?
Yeah, my brothers, we thought it was normal. That you don't know any better because that's... And not until we were older. So my older brother, okay, is a very good cook. And he's very good at hair. He can braid, which is not normal for boys in Nigeria. But when I was growing up, because he was quite nimble with his fingers, my mother would often ask him to help me take my braids out.
I wish my brother could do that too. He doesn't.
My younger brother is a clunky engineer sort of person. He can't do anything in the kitchen because he's just hopeless. But he knows how to fix the TV and things. And I was the child who just couldn't do anything, so I just read books. And so I think growing up in that way, maybe that's why. I really don't know. I really don't think I can honestly say this is why I became feminist. I've just always... Yeah, and in school I did well. I was always top of my class, so you couldn't sort of say to me, well, the boys are better than you because they've passed you in class, because that wasn't true. And I was quite athletic when I was younger, and I would race the boys, and I was so sort of determined to win all the time that I would sometimes try and kick the boy so he would fall down when we were racing, so I would win. This is just to say that I wasn't a retiring... soft female, even when I was a child. Yeah.
what do you think is the most important question today when it comes to gender equality in Nigeria?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think it's one question. I think because it's very complex. I mean, yeah, I don't think I can reduce it to one question. Because on the one hand, it's not that women in Nigeria are somehow terribly downtrodden, and it's not really that, because we have women who are in incredible positions of power. We have our most popular and most important minister is a woman. It's not surprising in Nigeria to have women be in charge of big corporations and banks and that kind of thing. But at the same time, there are cultural things. We're still raising girls in Nigeria to think that marriage is the ultimate thing for them. So that sort of thing there are cultural things that I would question and want to change. But you know, I don't think it's just Nigeria. I think it's really all over the world. It just manifests itself differently in different places. I think, you know, in Europe there is still very much that assumption that it's the woman who has to compromise in a relationship.
Yes.
It's nobody really tells a man. Our society doesn't tell men that they're incomplete without a woman, but our society tells women that they're incomplete without a man. And there are all of these subtle ideas about how to keep a man, or we still ask women, how do you balance family and work? And we never ask men.
Always. Especially when it's someone successful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
why do you think it is that in that way?
Because we're still coming from the absurd idea that somehow domestic work and family work is woman's work. And so when a woman steps outside of that and does something else, she still must find a way to balance both. It's an automatic assumption. It's something that happens everywhere in the world. What's different, I think, is the language in which it comes. But it's the same thing, right? And yeah, and I want it to change.
What do you think that we can do about it?
We can raise our children differently. That's what I don't think we can change it overnight. It's too. I mean, I don't know. It's thousands of years of human history. So, but I think it can change. I mean, there are ways in which gender ideas are changing, have changed. But it really is about how people are raised. I think it's about the parent raising the child and not saying and not making a boy think that he's somehow owed something because he's a boy, or making a girl think that she somehow owes somebody something because she's a girl. And I think it's very hard to let go of subtle things that you pick up when you're growing up and what your society telegraphs to you. It's very hard to let go of
Yeah,
them.
it's really hard because you can raise your children in one way and then the whole society says something different.
Yeah.
It's a struggle, really.
It is, but it's not it can be done. I mean, I have a sister-in-law who and I meddle in the lives of my family. It's terrible, but I do. So
how?
I don't mind my business, and I get involved in how they raise their children because I'm determined that all my nieces and nephews be feminists.
Of course.
So this doesn't always go well, but just basic things like saying to her mother, my niece's mother, don't say she only has to play with dolls. So my niece is interested in those helicopter things that you sort of have a remote control for and then they move.
Oh, those are so cool, yeah.
So she wanted one of them and her mother said, oh, you have your dolls. And then she goes, but I don't only want to play with the dolls. I like the color. She says, no, that's for boys. And I, the crazy aunt, I go off and I buy the helicopter for her. And who's to say she's not going to end up being the best engineer in the world, right? But if you stop that so early and say to her, no, you can't be interested in helicopters because you're a girl, that's a disaster, I think. Yeah. But just in little ways like that, yeah.
All right, now I think it's time for Beyonce, one of my favorite artists. I think we have a clip. Let's listen carefully.
We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or for accomplishments, which I think can be a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the way that boys are. feminist, a person who
was a part of Beyoncé's new song "Flawless," which is on YouTube, and Beyoncé has actually sampled a part of your lecture, a TED Talk. What did you think about it when you heard it for the first time?
Nothing really. I'm not really interested in talking about this.
Okay, I see. Last year you released a novel called Americana, which was very appreciated, especially here in Sweden. What will your next book be about? What are you writing on?
Oh, I don't know. And if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Because I'm very superstitious.
Is it a secret?
Yeah, it's either that I'm superstitious or I'm actually not writing anything and I'm pretending that I am. But even that I can't tell you.
Okay. But perhaps you can give us... perhaps you can tell us what book you're reading at the moment, because I need a new book now. I have
what
a
I'm
long
reading?
journey home, so I need
I'm
a new
reading...
book.
Where is home? Where is home for you?
Stockholm.
I'm reading... I read a number of things at the same time. Short attention span. So I'm reading this really lovely novel by Zoe Wicombe. She's South African. No, what is it called? It's about... If you just sort of look up Zoe Wicombe, her latest novel, it's very good. Yes, Wicomb.
Write it down.
Yeah, maybe a quarter in. It's about South Africa post-apartheid, and it's about a white woman and a colored woman, and I shouldn't give it away, but I'm maybe halfway through, and I just really love it. It's very good. I'm also reading... I'm rereading Michael Ondaatje's memoir, Running in the Family, which I first read many years ago and just absolutely loved.
What was it about it that you loved?
I love that there's a very beautiful nostalgia about it. And it's funny, and but it's about, it makes me long for this bygone time. And it's not even as if the experiences are anything like mine. I mean, it's about Dutch people in Sri Lanka. But there's just a sense of a wall that's passing away and a longing for it. And it's a kind of a beautiful sadness almost. There's just, and I love Michael Ondaatje in general. I love a lot of his work, but this one, because it's mostly true, right? I mean, I think it's maybe sort of 70% true and 30%.
Is that important to you?
As all memoirs are. No, I don't think. Memoirs are really how we remember things. They don't necessarily have to be exactly factually true. I remember actually asking him how much of it was true, and he said he didn't know.
Oh.
Yes. So what else am I reading? I'm reading the poetry of a Nigerian poet called Tanure Ojaide. And I'm also reading a book called The History of Europe.
Oh, okay. So 4 books at the same time.
Yes.
That's impressive.
And a number of magazines.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, for coming here. Thank you.
It's so beautiful.
You too. Tack snälla ni för att ni lyssnade. Vi är inte riktigt färdiga än här. Jag skulle vilja att kvällens DJ Elena kom upp på scenen. En stor applåd för henne. Elena, du ska få den här mycket. Elena, du ska ju spela här lite senare ikväll.
Ja, det
Vad
stämmer.
kommer vi få höra för något?
Oj, det här är mitt 3:e gig och andra dagen. Sammanlagt 10 timmar släpande på vinyl från Stockholm till Göteborg. Men jag har med mig en skiva som är jätteviktig för mig, som jag tänkte visa.
Ja, gör det. För det är ju coolt att spela på vinyl kan jag tycka nu när alla kör på sina Spotify-listor. Spännande att se vad du har för någonting du har släpat med dig ända hit.
Så måste jag erkänna att jag hann köpa lite skivor innan jag kom hit också. Men
DJs, ni kan ju inte komma till en ny stad utan att börja rota i massa skivbackar.
jo, det stämmer. Och det är lite dyrare i Stockholm än vad det är i Göteborg, måste jag ändå säga. Det var en musikal från 1969 från Italien som handlar om de svarta pantrarna. Och den har jag letat efter väldigt länge. Och så fick jag den när jag kom in i en skivaffär. Här i Göteborg på Andra Långgatan för 2 år sedan. Nu är jag bästa vän med killen som äger skivaffären. För att han var så himla gullig som gav mig den.
Vad är det du gillar med den då?
Ja, men det är ju väl... Det är ju en samling egentligen med olika folksånger som man aldrig har hört egentligen. Så alla låtar är intressanta på den. Och mellan varje låt så är det tal av olika svarta pantrar och likaså från allt från den fristående skolan som de höll i, lite olika tal från barn till kampsånger på gatan, när de marscherar på gatan. Så det är mellan varje låt är det helt enkelt ljudupptagningar från svarta pantrarna. Ja, det kommer jag.
Vad spännande. Jag ser verkligen fram emot att höra det där.
Tack.
Tack så mycket. Och hörni, det blir ju också filmquiz här nu, så sitt kvar. Och kom gärna tillbaka imorgon. 7:00 så kör vi igen. Och då under namnet Putins värsta mardröm. Vi kommer gästas av regissörerna bakom nya dokumentären Pussy vs Putin. Dessutom så kommer Göteborgs alldeles egna världsstjärna hit och se Gonzales. Gratis inträde förstås. Tack så mycket för ikväll.